And welcome to the Evidence and Reasons Academy. Evidence Reasons Academy. I'm Salvador Cordova. Today I'm going to take issue, very sharp issue, with Dr. Chris, who seems to think that evolutionary biology holds a place of status with electromagnetic theory or electromagnetism. I think that is a horribly absurd claim. This all began because I was quoting Coyne, who said in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than to physics. Whether that was Jerry Coyne, by the way, is a evolutionary biologist. He wrote the book Why Evolution is True, and for him to say that is amazing. Whether that was his intended meaning, at face value, I totally agree with him. In science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom. Absolutely somewhere near the bottom. Does not compare with physics. And physics contains theories such as electromagnetic theory, geometric optics, quantum mechanics, statistical mechanics, celestial mechanics, relativity, and even classical mechanics within its domain is superior to evolutionary biology. Superior. It's disturbing to hear this repeated over, that somehow evolutionary biology is so essential to science. It's not. It's garbage science. It's faith statements. I mean, as a religious faith, it's okay. But pretending to be science, that's just not right. So I get all these people saying, they're trying to defend science. It's like, where's the science? Compare it to real theories. You want to see how a real scientific theory should be? Look at electromagnetism. You only need to imagine life without electricity, and you'd appreciate how important electromagnetism, the discoveries that contributed to it that make modern life possible. If we did not discover electricity, magnetism, and its relationship with each other, that is electricity to magnetism, we wouldn't have the modern world. We can dispense with evolutionary theory. Lots of people don't believe in it, and they're perfectly fine in the modern day. They can even do biology. I'd argue they could probably do biology a lot better without evolutionary theory. So what good is it except as kind of a secular religion pretending to be science? And in that case, it's no good. Something that isn't science pretending to be is just not right. If they want to postulate it as a religious belief, that's fine. It should go into the religion department, faith speculations that'll never be proven. I'm going to read, I probe them with questions about some of the most basic stuff, and they're not able to, and some of them even think some of the questions I probe, they don't think they'll ever find an answer. And it's like, okay, so eukaryotic evolution, you don't think you'll ever find the answer how it happened. I read something recently that said they won't find the answer. And okay, so how does that qualify as science? That's a religious belief. So why don't I show how all this, the exchange began? I'll let Dr. Chris speak in his own words, and you'll see me. This was a exchange we had, and I'll just let him speak in his own words. The molecular level. So the first question I'll ask, I quoted Dr. Coyne, who wrote the book Why Evolution is True. He said, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the
pseudoscience and phrenology than to physics. And whether that's its intended meaning or not, I'd say I would agree with that on face value. Do you think that evolutionary biology holds a place along with theories like electromagnetic theory and physics?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Okay.
And I totally, I mean, so you know where that quote from Jerry Coyne comes from, right?
Of Vice and Men, and he was criticizing evolutionary psychology.
Right. Yeah. Which,
He said, this is
is fair
impossible.
enough. There's a fair, I would agree that evolutionary psychology has some significant issues with it, but that's because many evolutionary psychologists are sort of wedded to making just so stories, and we don't have quite the resolution of, developing our understanding of exactly.
All right. I'm not going to continue that too much. Let me just play the starting point where he says it's as good, or whatever he meant. I'll just let you hear it in his own words, because I want you to hear what he's claiming, because I'm going to absolutely shred it.
The molecular level. So the first question I'll ask, I quoted Dr. Coyne, who wrote the book Why Evolution is True. He said, in science's pecking order, evolutionary biology lurks somewhere near the bottom, far closer to the pseudoscience of phrenology than to physics. And whether that's its intended meaning or not, I'd say I would agree with that on face value. Do you think that evolutionary biology holds a place along with theories like electromagnetic theory and physics?
Yeah, absolutely.
It holds a place alongside electromagnetic theory. He said, absolutely. No, Dr. Chris, that's terrible. That's wrong. Electromagnetic theory is it was developed over roughly a century, maybe less. I mean, give or take. I mean, the main advancements with Faraday, Maxwell, Oersted. I mean, this led to it contributed to the discovery of the electron. I mean, come on, this is ludicrous. It's just ludicrous to compare evolutionary biology as holding the same place as electromagnetic theory. The contributions to modern science of electromagnetic theory are just unparalleled compared to Darwinism, compared to evolutionary biology. It's just ridiculous. You would not have cars because you need spark plugs, electronic timing. I mean, come on, you need generators, you need batteries to get that thing going. You would not have light bulbs. You wouldn't have this, even this internet discussion going without the development of electromagnetic theory. I mean, it's summarized by Maxwell's equations, but a lot of that's the summary of it. But the broader field, it contributes to society. It's just unbelievable anyone would think that evolutionary biology is on the same level. That's just absurd. That's ridiculous. It's insulting to really great science. And there were some interesting. Why don't I just read some of the things that I found just Googling? All right, so I'm going to just activate this here. Prestigious scientific journal, June 2011, June 1st, 2011, Nature Physics. 150 years ago, James Clerk Maxwell presented a set of equations that describes virtually any manifestation of electromagnetism. 150 years ago, James Clerk Maxwell presented a set of equations that describe virtually any manifestation of electromagnetism. Oh, and Janet is here. She says, I need to sleep, but will email you later. Much love. You're a wonderful brother in Christ. Before you sleep, let me pray for you, Janet. Dear Lord, thank you for the encouragement of people like Janet. This channel might not exist without people like her to encourage me. And Lord, she has many needs. She's a widow and she's disabled. And Lord, she looks to you for her provision. Please be with her tonight. Heal her body. We ask your miraculous power upon her, which has been manifest to keep her going. She would, without a miracle, she would not be here today. So we entrust her life to you. Thank you for all the goodness she's brought and the light she's brought into everyone's life that meets her. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a good night. So going back to this, so Maxwell's equations is really a summary of the broadness of electromagnetic theory, but it can be described. You can take Maxwell's equations like a lot of things in math, and you have all these corollaries or theorems that kind of come out of it, and it just it saturates the world. Now, that's not to say that we begin electromagnetic theory from Maxwell's equation. That, in a way, that was kind of the compact summary of it. The broadness of electromagnetic theory was developed before Maxwell, and you'll see that a lot of it did. And so when you go through Maxwell's equations, you'll see things like this is Gauss's law, and then the Faraday law of induction, and then Maxwell Ampere. So there are a lot of people that added pieces to this over time, and it was just, the pinnacle was Maxwell's equations, but the base is all this experimental research that helped develop it, starting with the Greeks that were, they're fascinated with static electricity, and we saw lightning, and we began to ponder, and then the experiments of Benjamin Franklin, which is interestingly, people have told me he's credited with kind of assigning the polarity of plus and minus, something like that. So the great development, when it really took off was in the 19th century. And so now look at all the things that you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have light bulbs. You wouldn't have flashlights. You wouldn't have televisions. You wouldn't have computers. You wouldn't have the internet. You wouldn't have telephones. You wouldn't have cell phones. You wouldn't have radio. You wouldn't have TV. You wouldn't have cars, spaceships, airplanes, satellites, GPS, and even something as basic as electric heating and electric ovens and stoves. It's ridiculous to say that evolutionary biology holds a place beside electromagnetic theory. You can live without evolutionary biology. You can live the modern life without evolutionary biology. You can do medicine. You can understand medicine without evolutionary biology. You can understand antibiotic resistance. It was Blythe, who probably was a creationist, didn't have to assume evolution. Blythe was the one who came up with the idea of in the struggle for existence, and how the more capable the creatures would be able to compete. There is a great book by Lauren Isley, the mysterious Mr. X or something, that showed how Darwin probably plagiarized Blythe. So Janet says, always a thumbs up for you, Sal. You do fantastic work in the field and ignore the insults of those who do not know better. Thanks so much, Sal. God bless you. Good night, Janet. And Joseph Tim Merriman, hello, brother. God bless. And hello. And so let me just say God bless to both of you. And I'm just going to type in a message. God bless Janet. So, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, just, do I have to harp on this? I mean, it's just unbelievable anyone would say that, and I couldn't let that go. And, you know, Dr. Chris in that exchange started talking about all sorts of things. He didn't actually make a comparison. And maybe it's just as well it ended there, because that wasn't the focus of our talk. We were talking about genetic entropy and potassium ion channels, and he basically ignored a lot of what I said, kind of chopped down a straw man of, I didn't address anything really I said. And, you know, that's kind of annoying. That's how it goes when you're dealing with people that accept evolution. They don't seem to actually figure out the argument you're actually making, because they keep criticizing something you didn't say. It's unbelievable. I mean, there's a channel of some individual, and I got fed up with him for 2 years. I mean, the guy could never, seemed pathologically incapable of characterizing what I said accurately. I think he has some serious issues upstairs, honestly. He's a known liar and thief, and just, I don't know. I don't like dealing with cyber stalkers. So anyway, let me read from the prestigious scientific journal Nature again. So I said, 150 years ago, James Clerk Maxwell presented a set of equations that describe virtually any manifestation of electromagnetism. Is it possible to find similarly compact descriptions, and is the search even worthwhile in every branch of physics? So let me just show Maxwell's equations, and we've covered that here, because they are so important to my areas of interest. But you could state it, you basically could, this is it, right there. That's the differential form. That's it. I mean, there are other ways that it's framed. I kind of like this one. This version I like. I mean, this one is in natural units. It's very elegant. This one is with SI units. And then you also see the integral form. I mean, this is just beautiful. It's hard, and you saw me kind of wrestling with it over a month. But compact. So compact. What describes so much of what makes the modern world tick, summarized in those equations. Unbelievable. I mean, this is pretty close to science at its best, if not its best. I mean, quantum mechanics is also really good. Your quantum mechanics, electromagnetism, it's hard to imagine it gets much better than that as far as scientific theories. Those equations by Maxwell are confirmed by everyday living. I mean, every time that an electrical device works, it's a confirmation of Maxwell's equations, which is way more than I could say for any confirmation of evolutionary theory. A lot of it is confirmed with circular reasoning and imagination and faith assertions pretending to be science. It's not confirmed like operational theories. What I mean by operational theories are theories where you can repeat. If you have the same conditions, you can definitely repeat an experiment. That's why when you turn on the light switch, it's very reliable, as long as all the components are working. Whereas evolutionary theory, you can't replicate all the claims. It's just in their imagination that they think they've actually made a credible inference. And I've criticized that it doesn't agree with other disciplines in physics, chemistry, and probability, that they're making all these assertions, and it just boggles the mind that they don't see it. What sort of theory is just like, well, it happened that way, that's science? In scientific theories, you have an idea of mechanism. That when you have an initial condition, you have a process, and then you have an outcome. And a scientific theory that says, well, we don't know what the initial condition was. We don't know all the processes involved. We don't know all the outcomes. That was brutally evident when I'm trying to ask questions about the protein orchard. So the ancestral form of each at the root of the tree of the protein orchard. What is the beginning state that led to that ancestor? Before that ancestor existed, what were the conditions that you're starting from? What was the process that led to that ancestor? And even a more basic question, what did that ancestor look like? And you're going to claim that this is a scientific theory. Oh, you just believe it existed, you don't know what it's like. You believe there was a process, you don't know the details of the process. And you believe there was an outcome, but you don't know what the outcome is, meaning the root of the tree for each of the trees in the protein orchard. No, sir, that is not a scientific theory. That is faith belief, faith assertions, pretending to be science. You want to see a real scientific claim? Here it is. That's why we can make radio waves. If you build the circuit a certain way and all the components are working, these equations predict what's gonna happen. And you generate radio waves. If you have, like, say, a magnetic field, say in your car, there is an alternator / generator, and the windings, the wires that wind, we call them windings, that wind around, and when it rotates, when it moves through that magnetic field, these equations predict it's going to generate voltage and current, therefore power. That provides power, provides energy to your battery, and then it provides energy to the spark plug, which gets the engine going. And oh, by the way, it's nice to have your battery that does the reverse. It takes electrical energy, and then when you're starting your car, it goes through a motor. The electricity going through the wires then, in combination with a magnetic field, starts the motor to rotate, starts your engine. Each time you start your car, each time you turn on your headlight, each time, every firing of your spark plug is a confirmation of electromagnetic theory. We know the initial state. If we have a given initial state, a process, and an outcome, it's predictable, it's testable, it's repeatable. We can make statements about what happens from a known state, a known process, we can predict the outcome. Evolutionary theory in the major claims doesn't have that. It's like, oh, this is what it was. We don't really know. Maybe. It was sort of like this. And it just happened. We don't know exactly the details. And this is the outcome. For some things, they have the outcome, but you ask for specific details, especially at the molecular level. It all falls apart. I mean, this is not, for religious theory, that's okay. To just advertise it as religious theory. Don't pretend it's science. Especially don't compare it to electromagnetism. It's insulting. So anyway, let us continue here. In 1861, James Clerk Maxwell published the first installment of his 4-part paper on physical lines of force in the Philosophical magazine. In the Philosophical magazine, the paper describes the mathematical physics of electromagnetism and was to become a major landmark in science. Get that? A major landmark in science. In the words of Richard Feynman, from a long view of the history of mankind, seen from, say, 10,000 years from now, there can be little doubt that the most significant event of the 19th century will be judged as Maxwell's discovery of the laws of electrodynamics. The Civil War will pale into provincial insignificance in comparison with this important scientific event of the same decade. Maxwell showed that electricity, magnetism, and light, 3 phenomena that seem so vastly different in their manifestation, are different aspects of one and the same phenomenon. More than that, Maxwell provided a set of just a few equations to succinctly describe what we know today as electromagnetism. For all the wide-ranging consequences and ramifications of Maxwell's work, it may be that compact description of electromagnetism in a single set of equations that makes us physicists so very proud of Maxwell's equations. And dare I show it one more time, because it is just a thing of beauty. There you go. So let's compare this to evolutionary theoretical genetics. Their most fundamental concept of fitness is not well defined. It's not well defined. It's hard to understand what it is. Just read Lewontin Winter Santa Fe Bulletin 2003 and you'll see it. He began to be like, what is this? It doesn't seem to add any insight. It's just the thing that makes the most makes the most. And then Andreas Wagner also said that in his book on robustness. And you hear it echoed, some complaints. It's like, well, the thing that made the most makes the most. I mean, duh. And a chapter I wrote in the Springer Nature reference work in Mathematics and the Arts and Sciences, published 2021, I said, isn't this obvious? But what's even worse, its fitness in the population genetic sense is not correlated with complexity. 2017, Lenski's paper, Cauchy as lead author, Proceedings, I think it was Proceedings National Academy of Science. It said, genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. Genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. What does that, I mean, so fitness is increasing and the genome's going to garbage? I mean, what kind of theory is that? I mean, you have something that's pretty much tautological. It's difficult to define, much less measure. Can you, I mean, fitness is reproductive success, the capacity for reproductive success, but then it's dependent on the environment, isn't it? That's a very unstable idea. So, let's contrast this with, say, the concept of mass. All right? So this thing has a certain amount of mass, and it really doesn't matter a lot of the details of the environment surrounding the mass. It's going to remain the same, and that's kind of nice. Now, with relativity, there's some subtleties here, because the faster it goes, it changes the inertial properties and therefore the mass. But I mean, it's still very predictable. It's well defined. Their characteristics. I mean, it's just, I can take something and say, hey, this block of gold is 1 kilogram, and other people can verify it, that it's within a degree of precision, several digits after the decimal point. You can't do that with fitness. You don't even know what it is. I mean, if evolutionary biology doesn't have any quantity like that, how can it compare with physics? The concept of even those classical concepts of physics, such as mass. Okay, so force equals mass times acceleration. Force equals mass times acceleration. That's the Newtonian approximation. From that, when you take, let's see, the integral of force over distance is energy. So you get the concept of energy. You have energy, the concept of, you have the concept of force in Maxwell's equations. Because the electric field you have it's defined by potentials. And then so the idea, you have also the kind of like potential energy, and it's related. It's not exactly the same as electric potential, but I mean, I'd have to work through the math so that you could see it. But the whole thing of potential, and like say potential energy, these are concepts that you get from classical physics, and then that gets imported as you develop ideas of potential energy. You develop ideas of potential. You get potential fields. So if you have an electron in one position relative to a field, it will have a potential energy. And if you divide away by the electric charge of that electron, you get the potential. I think that's right. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. So then you're able to develop this whole idea of a potential, a field, potential field. So when you see this here, this E this E here, that's beautiful. A lot of physics is wound up in that. But that's possible because you have well-defined ideas, mass. You have idea of acceleration. Acceleration is, if you have a clock and a way to measure length, you can determine acceleration. First of all, you can determine velocity and the change in velocity over time. The instantaneous change in velocity is the acceleration. Then you can get the force. And that's how you're able to determine also, you get a quantity for mass. It's just beautiful. But evolutionary biology doesn't have that. And that's why evolutionary biology in science's pecking order lurks somewhere near the bottom. They don't have any mechanism. I mean, they claim natural selection, but that's kind of falling apart now. because you can't define fitness, you're having a hard time. You can still say that there's selection, but it's like, well, how do you correlate it with the properties that lead to complexity? I mean, the theory starts to fall apart. If you're going to make claims that this evolved, and you don't know whether it was just neutral drift, random mutation, selection, and they just, it's really, the mechanism that they have is obfuscation. It's not really a mechanistic theory compared to physics. I just cringe when I read evolutionary literature, speculations pretending to be science, and they claim to have mechanisms, but then when you actually ask for details where it really counts, like say the evolution of eukaryotes or the evolution of major protein families, it's like, it happened. It's like, no, that's not a theory. So now let's continue on. And I'm just, I'm sorry, I'm enjoying ranting here about what real science is about. So let's continue here. This is just delightful. All right, so just read a little bit more. Maxwell had distilled an entire body of work on electricity and magnetism into 20 equations originally. Oliver Heaviside is credited with having compressed them into 4 partial differential equations that now typically appear. Indeed, using tensor notation or alternatively that of geometric algebra, as Mark Buchanan discusses on page 442 of this issue, these 4 equations can be collapsed into just one, crystallizing them into a monolithic monument of iconic beauty. One equation to rule all of electromagnetism. Yes, I've seen the tensor form. It's painful. I sort of can almost do it. I probably need a week of study to see how it's compacted down into one equation. I like what they said. Crystallizing them into a monolithic monument of iconic beauty. One equation to rule all of electromagnetism. And I don't see that in evolutionary biology. Fisher tried to say that it was, his fundamental theorem of natural selection, from that everything could, I guess his idea was everything could proceed from that. And no, it didn't work so well. It's been long falsified, is irrelevant. It's an interesting math claim, but it's detached from anything of significance in biology. And by the way, Richard Dawkins referred to it as biology's central theorem, and it's not. It just goes to show how evolutionary theory is driven by a lot of myths. And even Dawkins, I understand Fisher's theorem better than Dawkins, and that's not saying much. You can't boil it down to one equation, and that's problematic. I mean, if you are going to postulate that evolutionary biology is as good as electromagnetism, it'd be nice if you could boil it down to one equation and then compare that one equation, the tensor form, with whatever evolutionary biology has. But all they have is like, well, it happened. It happened. I mean, come on, it's a joke. It's a farce. That's evolutionary biology compared to electromagnetism. So now let's continue, see if I find. But Maxwell's equations also set out very practical guidelines. If an experimental discovery or a new theory describing phenomenon in the realm of Maxwell's equations is at odds with them, then finding that is either revolutionary or probably more likely flawed. The touchstone function is all the more remarkable if you stop to consider how far removed the modern day problems we tackle by solving Maxwell's equations are from the world in which Maxwell lived and worked. This was captured beautifully in the works of Max Planck in 1931 at the Clerk-Maxwell Centenary celebrations at the University of Cambridge. Nature 128, 1931. Maxwell's theory of electrodynamics, which was originally founded on quite special ideas of the mechanical nature of the ether, in accordance with the fact that in his time the mechanical conception of nature was considered nearly a matter of course, having received strong support through the discovery of the principle of conservation of energy. But after, by the aid of such mechanical notions, Maxwell had found his electromagnetic differential equations and had recognized the extent of their efficiency, he did not hesitate in pushing aside as a negligible accessory the mechanical interpretations of the differential equations in order to make them independent and to give his theory its pure and sublime shape. Just as we have Maxwell's monument to lean on, there is comfort in knowing that there is a compact set of laws for thermodynamics, or postulates for special relativity. These basic equations, laws, or axioms may not, in themselves, give a clear notion of the wealth of phenomenon that are ruled by them, yet they provide markers for how far we can stray once real boundaries are reached in a given field. Then the major revisions are called for, famously the fact that Maxwell's equations are not consistent with Newtonian mechanics led to the formulation of the special theory of relativity. Let's not beat up too much on Newton, because the idea of mass really was, mass times acceleration is pretty important. Force over distance, the work energy theorem, the concept of energy, you have a lot of Newtonian stuff. Even though we've moved beyond Newtonian mechanics, you have the modern expression of modern physics, we still have classical roots. You look at, Newtonian mechanics got reformulated into classical mechanics with things like Lagrangians and Hamiltonians. Quantum mechanics, Schrodinger's equation, is described with a Hamiltonian operator. It's just hard to run away from the classical concepts, because a lot of measurements that we have to do have to boil down to classical conceptions. And it's a little bit too hard to get into that right now. And then this whole thing about the ether, we've covered that on the channel. I think it may be coming back. And we reviewed some of that on this channel. And I've also said modern physicists now say general relativity can't be quite right. Okay, so that was probably heretical. Around the time I was born, that probably would have been heretical to say that. But at this point, they're saying it can't be quite right. And this 0-point energy is bringing back the concept of the ether. Just look it up in Wikipedia. And I've been trying to work through some of the math of this to kind of show it. You can even take practically high school physics, preferably a little bit higher than that. When they teach a little bit of relativity in high school. So let's just go up to the college level. And some of I'm going to try to go through some of this, and you'll see that maybe the ether is there, and we have to reinterpret our understanding of the Michelson-Morley experiment. But anyway, let me just read some more about the history of electromagnetic theory. Why don't we go into detail, and then there'll be part 2. I'll be reading on the history of electromagnetic theory, and you'll see how rich and how valuable it is to science. In evolutionary biology, you could just dispense with, honestly. Put it in the religion department. Don't put it in the sciences. It doesn't belong. It doesn't belong alongside other disciplines. It's insulting to to these other disciplines that are well established, that have contributed to the advancement of modern technology and modern life. To put it alongside as if you need it, that's just insulting. I'm sorry. Anyway, so let's read a little bit. How about from, let's see. I'll read about, I have an article on Michael Faraday. I think I want to read about Michael Faraday. By the way, Michael Faraday was a very devout Christian. Darwin was not at all. He was an agnostic. He actually said he thought it's a damnable doctrine, when he's referring to the doctrine of hell. And he had an emotional reaction to that idea in Christianity. Faraday was a very devout Christian in contrast. Faraday has done so much more for society than Darwin ever did, and for modern science. Faraday, his name is attached to the third of Maxwell's equations. It's Faraday's law of induction. So let's cover Faraday. God rest his soul. Historical engineers, Michael Faraday, a founding father of electrical science. On November 5th, 2018, Gary Elinoff. Who was Michael Faraday? What did he contribute to the field of electrical engineering? Here's a look at some of his most important accomplishments. In the early 19th century, much of what we now take for granted in engineering was unknown or even mistaken for magic. One of the first secular wizards to build much of the foundation of what we now call electrical science and engineering was Michael Faraday. Yes, he was a secular wizard, but he was also a devout Christian. God rest his soul. Here is one of Einstein's heroes. Oh, by the way, if we're going to talk about great scientists, there is a book, Einstein's Favorite Scientists. Let's see. Let's see if I could find it. There it is. Oh, wait. No, I thought I saw... Oh, Einstein's Heroes. Einstein's Heroes. Here it is. Einstein's Heroes. On the left, Michael Faraday. In the middle, Isaac Newton. On the right, James Clerk Maxwell. Einstein's hero. Imagining the world through the language of mathematics. Robin Aryan Road. And his heroes weren't Darwin, thank God. So I'm just saying, you can't put evolutionary biology beside electromagnetic theory. Two of his heroes there listed, Faraday and Maxwell, contributed big contributions to electromagnetic theory, and it wouldn't have been possible without Newton, where we get concepts of things like energy. I mean, formalized notions of energy. So, I mean, come on. More evidence. Okay, so this is more evidence that Darwinism, evolutionary biology, does not compare with electromagnetic theory in physics. And even some of the lesser theories of physics are better. Like, say, geometric optics. How about celestial mechanics? Come on. Anyway, Michael Faraday. Let's continue. A portrait of Michael Faraday created in the 1820s. Faraday's origins. Michael Faraday was born in 1791 in England, the son of a blacksmith. Faraday was not easily ushered into the world of academia. As a child, he apprenticed under a bookbinder, giving him ample opportunity to read. His inquisitive mind led him to attend lectures at the Royal Society, among them a lecture by chemist Humphrey Davy. Faraday sent Davy over 300 pages of notes he'd taken on this series of lectures, the diligence of which prompted Davy to hire Faraday on as his assistant. Through Davy, Faraday was able to meet and learn from many of the great scientific minds of Europe. Michael Faraday never received a fully formal education, though he did receive an honorary Doctor of Civil Law degree from the University of Oxford at the age of 41. Despite this, and despite his birth to a common family, a rarity among intellectual circles of the day, Faraday came to achieve fame and veneration in his field. Throughout his life, Faraday was responsible for several greatly important discoveries in the field of electromagnetism. Here's an overview of some of his most notable contributions to science and engineering. The world's first electric motor. The world's first electric motor. Okay, guys, just imagine the world without electric motors. Your car wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to, you'd have to crank. But really, the reverse of an electric motor is the generator. If you weren't generating electricity, it's going to be hard to run your car. Anyway, we certainly couldn't start certain modern engines with it. It'd be very difficult. But let's continue on. Before Faraday, Hans Christian Ørsted had already demonstrated the link between electricity and magnetism, heretofore unknown. The apparatus was simple: an electric battery and a wire loop placed in proximity to a compass needle. When the battery's voltage was applied to the wire, the compass needle moved. Faraday took the idea one giant step forward by demonstrating the first electric motor. Now that was clever. So this electricity created going through the wire created a magnetic field, and it moved the compass. And it's like, okay, so it's moving. When you have electricity, you can use that there's a little bit of a force there, so you can make an electric motor. This is incredible. So a rendering of Faraday's electric motor modified. A photo of an actual Faraday's electric motor. Okay, so that was the actual one. And this is incredible. I'd have to think how this. So he was able to get the mercury. Well, this is a dangerous experiment if you're doing it with mercury. Ooh. So you're getting an electric current going through here. Interesting. You have a magnetic field in that direction, and it's going to make this move. Okay. Looking at the schematic to the left, note that a permanent magnet is mounted within a pool of mercury, and that the battery's positive terminal is connected to the pool of mercury. A hook loosely suspends one end of a wire, and the other end of that wire dips into the mercury. Mercury is of course a liquid, so the wire is free to move, and because mercury is also a conductor, once the battery is connected, there is a closed circuit. As we now know, an electric current flowing through a conductor creates its own magnetic field, which here interacts with the magnetic field provided by the permanent magnet, causing Circular motion. I don't quite understand how this thing would work, but there's circular motion. Interesting. The result is that the suspended wire rotates around the battery. While the invention had few immediate practical results, the astonishing potential of the discovery was obvious to all. So he was able to get this thing to circulate. I wish I could see how it actually rotated. It's not clear from the diagram what direction it rotated. So I think it's this that can rotate. That wire, did it say the wire rotates? The wire is free to move. So somehow this wire is free to move, and it had a circular, I guess that turning is the rotation of the wire. That's amazing, as well as its magnetic field. Anyway, let's continue. Electromagnetic induction. The picture below is the world's first electric transformer, created by Faraday in 1831. And this is, wow. They better guard this. I mean, so much of the modern world depended on this device right here, because this was the pioneering device right there. By today's standards, it's not a thing of beauty. Oh, God rest his soul. What we have here are two electrically independent coils wound upon a metal core. When a current was induced in the first coil, an electric signal appeared across the second. Most importantly, the signal on the second coil was only present at the moment the first current was applied, and at the instant the current was removed. Faraday also discovered that inserting a magnet into a coil of wire would also induce a current in that wire. Similar to the previous experiment, however, the induced current only appeared during the times that the magnet was moving. When the magnetic field presented to the coil by the magnet was changing. When the magnetic field presented to the coil by the magnet was changing. Thus was discovered magnetic induction, whereby a changing magnetic field presented across an electric conductor produces electricity. So now again, let's see if I have Maxwell's equation. This is Faraday's law of induction right here. This is the statement of that formally in mathematics. So what a variety of people, including Maxwell, was to codify what Faraday's discovery in very precise mathematical language. And this, guys, is real science, which evolutionary biology is not. Okay, so let's continue. If I can find where I left off. The first electric generator. Faraday also devised what can be considered the first electrical generator. Again, it is most easily understood when comparing a version constructed today to Faraday's own illustrations. So left, a modern created version of Faraday's electric generator. This one here. And a rendering of Faraday's original electric generator drawn by Faraday. So that is his own drawing. This is amazing. Looking at the model on the left, the black items are permanent magnets. Turning the crank rotates the copper disc. This generates an electric potential measured from between the center of the disc and its outer edge. Now, I don't know how they're able to measure electric potential back then. They didn't have modern day voltmeters. So again, Faraday had to devise his own measuring instruments. This is amazing. This is real science, unlike evolutionary biology, which is fake science pretending. It's faith statements pretending to be science. Advances in chemistry. While Faraday is most noted for his contributions to the then nascent field of electroscience, he also made some important contributions to chemistry. Perhaps most notably, while not the discoverer of electrolysis, he did formulate quantitative relationships describing the process in terms of the amount of current applied over time. He was also the first individual to isolate benzene and discovered that the compound contained equal numbers of carbon and hydrogen atoms. He was also the first researcher to synthesize compounds derived from carbon and chlorine, C2Cl6 and C2Cl4. Among the many ways that this groundbreaking physicist, chemist, and inventor is immortalized is his namesake, the farad, the definition of the storage capacity of a capacitor. Faraday died in 1867 at the age of 75. He's buried with his wife Sarah in London, having turned down a place of burial in Westminster Abbey. How have Faraday's accomplishments affected you? Which energy engineer would you like to see discussed next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me see if I could find something about Faraday's Christian faith. Okay, so this is from Christianity Today, and I hope the scholarship's good. We'll just go with it, and then we'll wrap this up. There'll be, God willing, another episode of this, contrasting evolutionism with real science, like electromagnetic theory. This is also a great opportunity to commemorate and memorialize real achievements in science. And there's some people, students of physics, students of electrical engineering that might appreciate this. I certainly have appreciated all the memorializing of these really great achievements in science. And it's also through understanding what real science is that I began to detest evolutionary biology, because it does not hold a place along real sciences. It is mostly faith speculations pretending to be science. So let's read about Michael Faraday. His Christian faith influenced this science. Brilliant people in all walks of life can inspire us, showing us the way to improve our own performance. It's natural that we try to elucidate how their minds work, to help us in our own quest for excellence. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16 says, "In the same way let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Michael Faraday was one of the most influential scientists who worked during the Victorian era, and he certainly let his light shine both in science and in his faith. His careful and methodical experimentation, as well as his insightful analysis and evaluation of the results, paved the way for modern chemical analysis and, more obviously, the electronic era that led to the benefits that we enjoy today. What made him tick? Why did he observe the details that others had missed? And how did he have the presence of mind to put together these observations and come to new conclusions and theories, then put these to the practical tests in so many ways? Many researchers have looked at the way Faraday's fundamental Christian principles influenced the way he lived and worked, and that is what I will discuss in this article. He was a committed Christian, a member of a fundamentalist nonconformist sect called the Sandemanians, who believed in simple, humble living with care for the disadvantaged in their community and the absolute truth of the gospel. As well as his extensive and meticulous experiments that solved many mysteries of the time about chemistry and electricity, most famously, he was the first to show how an electric motor could work using magnetic and electric forces. He was also active in scientific leadership and was an advisor to many government bodies. His scientific knowledge helped in such diverse areas as the safety of mines, cleaning the pollution of the Thames, and preservation of artworks and sculptures, yet he refused to be involved in investigating the use of poison gases during war. On top of all this, he was paramount in fostering scientific education and the Christmas lectures that he made famous at the Royal Institution in London that were originally set up by his mentor, Sir Humphrey Davy. These are still widely patronized by young people of all ages. If you are interested in details of his many scientific achievements, there are some suggested easy to read references at the end of the article. Among the many scientific establishments that bear his name is the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion at St. Edmund's College, Cambridge. Its primary aim is to undertake scholarly research and publication on science and religion. Humble beginnings. That Faraday was able to follow his passion and his calling to do science at the time in British society was a remarkable feat. That he achieved such heights in both his profession and in the eyes of high society, including Queen Victoria herself, is close to miraculous. In those days, people like Faraday, whose families were working class and or poor, got neither the opportunities to do science, nor even an education beyond primary school. The Sandemonians were not particularly interested in education, believing in the simple ways of the Bible, but Faraday got his break when, due to the necessity of earning a living, he became the messenger boy for a bookbinder and eventually an apprentice. As he was working with the books, he read them and became interested in the scientific experiments described in some of them. He took himself off to some cheap scientific lectures and self-help groups because his natural curiosity and brilliance made him skeptical of the results of any experiments he couldn't reproduce for himself, and he wanted to know more. Eventually, the bookbinder George Rebieux set up a small laboratory for him to use after hours, and so his life of science with his acute analysis of experimental results began. In the 1800s, it was actually easier for women of privilege, in those days just called rich upper-class women, to indulge in a passion for science that it was for poor people such as Faraday. It is relevant here to mention that Faraday knew and corresponded with some of those whose books he was binding. Some of these were women who were not allowed to attend university, but because of their social status and help from their families, they also followed their passions in learning about science for themselves. 3 of them were Jane Marcet, who wrote educational material on chemistry, Mary Somerville, who did the same for maths and physics, and Ada Lovelace for helping Charles Babbage with programming, the very first computer. Man of science, man of God, an enigma. One thing that fascinates me about Faraday is how he rose from poverty to become such a great and respected man in Victorian society, yet he remained such a humble man, only taking enough for his immediate needs and certainly not living the high life of some of his peers. And study God's word is here. He said, my wife asked why I listened to you. Answer, I learned enough to make evolutionists cry for mommy. Oh, thank you. What a nice thing to say. I'm typing you a message. God bless you and the missus. So I was covering, someone I debated said that evolutionary biology holds a place beside electromagnetic theory, and I'm kind of shredding that claim. I spent the last hour shredding that, and now I'm highlighting one of the great contributors to electromagnetic theory, Michael Faraday, and he's a great man of science and a man of God. We would not have the modern world. Just imagine life without electricity. This is how important Faraday was. Without Faraday or someone like him, we would not have the modern world that has electricity, where we have even light bulbs here. We can thank God for the life he lived in honor of Jesus Christ. We can live without Darwinism, without evolutionary biology. We cannot live without electricity, at least in the modern sense. Even when he was successful as a scientist, famously and extremely well respected in high London society, he accepted only modest lodgings as president of the Royal Institution, the research institution, eschewing the more elaborate dwellings of his peers. He refused the knighthood. He refused the presidency of the Royal Society, the club of famous scientists, so he could continue with what he regarded as his God-given talents for research. And he instructed his family to insist on private burial, although he was offered a place at Westminster Abbey alongside Newton. Alongside Newton. A plaque was subsequently placed there to honor him alongside Newton. Many researchers attribute this attitude to his deep Christian faith. Although as a prominent and very well-respected scientist, Faraday generally kept his religious views private, it seems to various historians that his Christian faith informed every aspect of his life, private, public, and scientific. As evidence for this influence, some of his public quotations include, "The Creator," not the evolutioner, the Creator. "The Creator governs his material works by definite laws resulting from the forces impressed on matter. The laws of nature, as we understand them, are the foundations of knowledge of natural things. The natural works of God can never, by any possibility, come into contradiction with the higher things that belong to our future existence. And mathematics offers only a limited training for the mind, since it deals with logical relationship and not with the behavior of physical objects in the world." One of the most interesting investigations about the way the Bible influenced Faraday's thinking has been done by Herbert Pratt, who found Faraday's 2 personal Bibles that had been extensively annotated. From these, he proposed some of the ways in which Faraday's faith informed his life and his science. I thought this was a most intriguing way of trying to find out what such a great man was thinking and what he thought was important. In particular, it is often quoted that Faraday gained inspiration from Romans chapter 1, verse 20. "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made." Because he was known to quote this in one of his public lectures. But there is an enigma. Firstly, in his quotation, Faraday left off the final line, "so that people are without excuse." Secondly, the context of this passage gives it a totally different meaning, discussing the ideas of judgment on others and by God on you. Thirdly, Pratt has shown that this passage was not underlined in his personal Bibles. Instead, it seems, in his personal reflections, he was more interested in other, deeper reflections. So why did he quote this passage in his lecture? It seems to me, in his quest for excellence in all things, including public education, Faraday had already learned the art of how to inspire an audience with a good turn of phrase, and so he used that partial quote from Romans to inspire his audience. His own guidance was from a more reasoned, complex philosophical reading of the Bible. I have to object here. This is speculation. We really don't know. And that is a beautiful passage in the Bible, Romans chapter 1, verse 20. And Christianity today, I think, is really in bed with the evolutionists. So I don't like, they're getting very liberal and wokey. So this part of the article, I have to question. Anyway, the research technique of analyzing someone's notes in their own personal Bible is a really interesting and insightful way of finding how they gain guidance for their life's work, and could also be an inspiration to all of us. If you're interested in this line of research, I suggest you read Herbert Pratt's paper mentioned in the list below. In conclusion, Faraday's life's work shows that it is not only possible but beneficial and inspirational that men and women of God can also be effective men and women of science within our society. In Faraday's words, there is no conflict. Most of this was good, the article, except for the last part. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. I don't know why they made such a big issue about that. There are many things in God's Word. When you read the entire context, you get one message, but it doesn't mean that all the little verses can't give us insight and truth even in isolation. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. The study of, if you want to learn about, this is very deep. If one wishes to learn about God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, study what has been made. And people, it's hard when you actually look at the fine-tuning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the sun. You'll see the wisdom and majesty and power. Something that caused it was immensely powerful, had abilities we do not have, has wisdom we do not have, had command of science that we don't have or ever expect to have. Someone who could create life. If life were that easy to make, we'd have cured all diseases. So when we declare God's work, we declare his majesty, his wisdom, power. That should motivate us to give him all the glory and honor that he is worthy. Someone who's able to do that should be worshipped. That's how I feel. Study God's Word says, so many false teachings, I'm starting my own videos, 10 people live stream debates. So anyway, that's mostly all I have to say for this round. And we're going to continue this because I want to highlight what real science is. And it's very easy to contrast it with evolutionary biology, which is just really garbage by comparison. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be harsh, but it needs to stop being elevated as real science. It can go into the religion section or the philosophy department, but it really doesn't belong in the sciences. It has no place. I mean, if you want to believe it, you can. But people are able. The modern world has moved forward. America is the most technologically advanced society, and much, up until like the Scopes monkey trial, we really didn't need evolutionary biology. We don't need it today. It's trying to justify its existence. You can do just as well without it. And I've suggested alternatives of how you can perceive that the diversity and structure of species is created for a reason. The similarity, patterns of similarity and diversity are created for scientific discovery. If you go with that paradigm, you don't need to assume common descent. I mean, it may be helpful. It's a helpful speculation to explain the order of the fossil record, etc. But it doesn't jive with our understanding of physics, chemistry, and probability. That some of the mechanistic changes are just beyond belief, starting with things first, origin of life, which is separate from evolutionary theory, but then the first layer is eukaryotic evolution, and maybe slightly before that is the origin of major protein families. There are other parts of the cell with other macromolecules that are involved. We're not quite there in understanding their role, particularly the sugar code, but that's subject to another day, another discussion, maybe not even in my lifetime. But thank you all for joining us. I may read this article in my main channel because it is such a good article. It's a great testimony. So the Lord Jesus be with you all, and I'm going to close this as I usually do with Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini. Take care, everyone, and to my brothers and sisters especially, the Lord richly bless you.